This is David Prosper, host of The Leadership Revolution. Thanks for listening to the following broadcast from Public House Media.
Strike three, you're out. Welcome back to Caught Listening, the baseball show that goes beyond the white lines. Christian Heimall here with you, broadcasting every week as we do as part of the Public House Media Network. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, review, share us with your friends and family, wherever you get your podcasts, Apple and Google Play, Spreaker.com, and iHeartRadio, as well as publichousemedia.org. You can also be a part of the show by finding us on social media. Just search Caught Listening by Public House Media on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. You can also email the show, caughtlisteningphm@gmail.com. We continue on with our four-part series of baseball's unwritten rules. So far, we've heard from a guy who covers the sport. We've heard from a gentleman who manages in the sport, and now we're fortunate enough to be joined by one of the guys who plays the sport and plays it currently and plays it at a high level as well. He's former major leaguer and current Chicago Dog in the American Association. He's Tyler Ladendorf. Tyler, we appreciate the time, bud. Thanks so much.
Absolutely. No, thanks for having me.
Real quick, before we get into all this stuff, as one of the few pro ball players who's actually been on the field consistently this year with the American Association and Independent League and the Chicago Dogs, what's it been like being able to play in a season that, in a year that has been so strange for everybody else?
I mean, just thankful, to be honest with you. Obviously, with everything that's going on, understand the situation, just to be able to, for me, come back to, see my mom, my grandma, and live with them for the little bit of this summer that we had. This is where I grew up. So, there's a little bit of a kind of an added bonus, if you want to call it, with me coming here. But no, I mean, you just, with everything that's going on, you're thankful that, you get to go out there and just kind of run around with a good group of guys. It's been, considering what you would have thought would have happened this summer in May, you feel lucky without a doubt.
For sure, 100%. And, I mean, we're happy to watch you play as well as so many others. It's one of those interesting things, and again, this is part 3 of our 4-part series, and the unwritten rules of baseball, Tyler, are one of those things that you bring them up and you almost invoke a passion in people, whether it's fans, players, whatever it is, because they can be so controversial. But for you as a guy who's been in the majors over the last couple of years, and you've seen this, where did the unwritten rules come into you? When did you first hear about them, or when did you first start learning about these unwritten rules?
Probably as soon as I got into pro ball. I felt like I was at an advantage. I was in the Gulf Coast League with the Twins when they drafted me. We had Jake Mauer, Joe Mauer's older brother at the time. Well, still, obviously. So when you talk about whether it's a manager that's been in the big leagues or, obviously every coach in pro ball is, skilled at their craft. They obviously wouldn't be coaching in pro ball if they weren't.
Right.
But there's just different conversations, different ways you go about it. When you're around, when you get to the big leagues or you're around people in the big leagues, there's just little, and it's probably the best way to describe it is just the way you go about communicating, the analogies you make, all the little things. So I felt like I was lucky to be around and be involved in conversation that had kind of that advanced communication, so to say, as soon as I got into pro ball. So I feel like, I was in a good spot as far as, kind of like you said, the do's and don'ts. And then obviously the conversation about that whole gray area. Obviously you do. You got your do's and don'ts, but there's people, like you said, with the inciting of kind of emotion with any talk about that gray area. There's so much gray area as far as what goes on that it's, like you said, people get emotional.
Where does that conversation start? Because that's, like, for example, there are certain ones, and there's that gray area of throwing at guys or pimping a home run, whatever it is. But there are also those etiquette things, like not running across a mound as a base runner, or, tapping the catcher on the shin guards, your first AB. Where do those conversations happen? Is that something that, is that a spring training thing? Is that just, the new guy shows up and the coach pulls you aside? How do those conversations happen?
Yeah, no, you're right. The communication between guys, during the game, and to be honest with you, the way it actually starts is when somebody does something really stupid and clearly crosses the line.
Okay.
Whether it's pimping a homer or, stealing a base in like a 9-1 game, nobody's holding anybody on. So the conversation starts when somebody does something actually well across the line, so to say.
Mm-hmm.
And then, you know what I mean? And then it's like, oh, yeah, but then this one time, you know what I mean? And then you start bringing up stories and instances from 4 or 5, 6 years ago throughout people's careers. And then that's really how the conversation throughout, just within a team and their mindset actually gets started, is when the first instance of whether it's somebody on your team or the other team just does something, whether it's just, a lapse in judgment at the time, or they, whether they intentionally pimp a homer or intentionally steal a base in a blowout, it really is when someone does something that crosses the line, then that's when the conversation about not only that instance, but then also the gray area and whatnot comes in. So, yeah, no, it's really just nobody really talks about it until somebody does something stupid. It'd probably be the easiest way to put it.
Well, and it makes a lot of sense, but it also kind of goes into, and you've been in enough clubhouses to know this, kind of that clubhouse culture too, because it could be, for example, when you were with Oakland as opposed to now where you're in independent baseball, you've got guys with different experiences, different veteran status, and different, upbringings in the game, so to speak. So does it change with each clubhouse? Does it change with each uniform that you put on and with each guy that's part of that team?
Yeah, no, you gotta be realistic with where you're at. Not only your situation, everybody else in your clubhouse's situation, but then also the guys you're going up against. Like, whether so in a 6-1 game, if a guy bunts, well, that's a huge part of his game. In this league, it'd be like, well, he's trying to get back to, affiliated ball, so you're not going to necessarily get mad at the guy in this league for bunting in a 6 or 7-1 game, whereas in the big league, if you bunted in a 6 or 7-1 game, there'd probably be a lot of chirping, you know what I mean, a lot of weird looks.
Right.
So, no, you just got to be realistic with just a scenario in totality, and that's taking into consideration everybody that's obviously involved with each different instance, and just kind of the reasoning behind maybe you don't look at something, the way he does. And so, yeah, no, you just got to keep everybody's perspective kind of to the forefront. And I feel like if people did that, you'd avoid, just the unnecessary beanball, so to say, and all that stuff that obviously nobody really wants to see.
Mm-hmm. Talking with Tyler Ladendorf, former major leaguer, current professional baseball player in the American Association of Independent Baseball. I'm interested because you've been to the big leagues a couple of times. Does the dynamic around unwritten rules or the conversations around unwritten rules change when you get to the show as opposed to minor leagues or independent baseball?
Yeah, it changes as far as in the big league, you better know what should and shouldn't be done in certain scenarios. So in the big leagues, the first time it happened, like, somebody's probably going to get hit. Whereas in the minor leagues, there's some conversation, maybe like if I did something stupid, next time I got to second base, like their shortstop would be like, hey man, like don't do that. Or, you know what I mean? There's in the minor leagues, there's a lot more scenarios where I feel like before it gets escalated, there would be a chance to diffuse the situation. But because when you talk about the big leagues, like there's just a certain level of information that would have kind of expected to have been attained throughout the course of your career before you got there, to where anything that kind of clearly crosses the line, it's really kind of not so much an eye for an eye, but there's no like, okay, my bad, like, no, you kind of messed up, like, whether it's you or there needs to be kind of repercussions in the big leagues every time somebody does something clearly, when they cross the line, if that kind of makes sense.
For lack of a better term, the minor leagues are almost like your internship in unwritten rules. It's a chance for you to learn and a chance for you to fail in those situations and be taught those, as opposed to when you get to the majors, it's, listen, you better know now at this point.
Absolutely. No, absolutely.
So take me through some of these, because again, for many of our listeners, many of them haven't played at the level. I would venture to say 99.5% of them haven't played at ball at your level. So some of them are a little interesting, and I think some of them are where You can kind of get it. Like, and I'm going to bring up Alex Rodriguez twice here because he's the one that in recent memory at the major league level I think people relate to most recently. The first one being, don't yell, I got it, when you're running the base paths. That seems like a logical one. Okay, don't be that guy. But then the other one that I think a lot of people, when it happened, nobody realized that was one of those unwritten rules, and that's when he walked across the mound with Dallas Braden on the hill in the game against Oakland. I mean, those two situations, take us through, like, as a player, and where your head might be in those situations and why those things are kind of so important.
So, I mean, the walking across the mound, I mean, that's kind of a deal where because it's a mound and it would make more sense to, even though if you had to veer a few feet out of the way to stay on a flat surface, that would make the most sense to stay in the grass. Mm-hmm. Nobody wants to jog or run up a slanted and then another slanted surface. So it was kind of the idea that, like, hey, it's not so much about running over the mound as, like, I mean, we've seen crazy things. I mean, what if you ran over the mound and twisted an ankle, like just running? And so I think that was the idea of behind it, the fact that he just kind of not went out of his way to go over the mound, but was like, hey, by the way, even though you're right here standing, I mean, it would be different if Dallas Braden was like, you know, way over, but he wasn't that far away off the mound. So I think it was kind of, and let's not, you cannot forget the aura that Alex Rodriguez knew he had versus the aura that Dallas Braden had. Like, you're talking about kind of some guy that not a whole lot of people know, and this is Alex Rodriguez. So it is undoubtedly a little bit of that intimidation. But, yeah, no, I think that any competitive pitcher would have done what Dallas Braden did and said, hey, man, like, it wasn't so much of, hey, get the F off my mound, as so much, if you're trying to intimidate me, that's not going to work right now. Well, and he chose different words, obviously, but I think that was the gist of it.
It's interesting you bring up the aura surrounding Rodriguez because that's one of those things that we see it in the NBA or in the NFL. The veteran guys, the superstar gets the call, so to speak, superstar treatment and whatnot.
Yep.
A guy like Alex Rodriguez versus a guy like, you know, no offense, but like let's say you guys are on the same team, Tyler Ladendorf, who maybe doesn't have the same cachet, so to speak, with the national media. How much does that play into, you know, who can, quote unquote, toe the line of those unwritten rules?
Well, here would be the question I have for you is, if I ran across the mound on Garrett Cole, what do you think the conversation would be?
It's not going to be pleasant. I'm pretty sure of that.
Let's just I think if you want to be honest, let's flip it and see if there was some kind of bench player hitter running across the mound on Garrett Cole. There would be. You can imagine the stuff that would be, you know, the chirping that would be going on, not only at that instance, but then also whether it be on Twitter and after the fact. So, no, like you said, the fact that it was Alex Rodriguez, it wasn't so much of in Dallas Braden's reaction of get off my mound as so much like, hey, if you're trying to intimidate me, which was 100% what Alex Rodriguez was trying to do, and make sure, hey, in case you forgot, I'm Alex Rodriguez and I play for the New York Yankees.
Right.
That's really, I feel like, all it was. And Dallas Braden was just basically letting them know, hey, like that's we get it. You're the Yankees. You're Alex Rodriguez, but I'm gonna compete. You know.
Right.
And so yeah, no, I mean. No, but it's funny when I think about, like, if I were going to do it, you know, on Garrett Cole or somebody, Trevor Bauer, you know, I mean.
Or a guy like Scherzer who's cursing at you just for waking up, you know, like guys like those, you know, just have those mean streaks in them. So it's definitely funny. Talking with Tyler Ladendorf here, professional baseball player, former major leaguer, about the unwritten rules of baseball. You're what I think it's safe to say you're one of those veteran guys in any clubhouse you step into, considering the experience that you've been in and the places that you've been in your baseball career. What kind of responsibility do you take if you have a younger guy on your team or maybe on the opposing team? You mentioned, I know I've been following you throughout the summer, and I know you had one of those instances where it's a blowout game and a kid steals second on you. I mean, it's defensive indifference because of the point in the game, but for you as a veteran, what kind of responsibility do you take to be one of those teachers of these unwritten rules?
Yeah, no, you just, I mean, and, you know, obviously you got to, at times, like, and for that instance, in general, the way I approach or kind of worded it to him probably could have been better. But ultimately, no. As long as you basically, and he the very next day, came and said like, hey man, like, it was just really just kind of a brain fart. And
yeah.
So I mean, it's really just a deal where, hey, if ultimately, regardless of what it said in the moment, in the heat of the moment, you can't necessarily put a high price tag on that. But if somebody comes up to you the day after and it's like, hey, like, it's not even about like I was wrong or you were right. It's, hey, like, it's like we're good. What happened shouldn't have happened, and it is regardless of what, like I said, is what is said in the heat of the moment. It is if you can just essentially remind people of just the little things that shouldn't happen, then that ultimately, as an older guy, that's really all you can ask for. So no, I mean, it's going to happen. You would play too many games for brain farts not to happen.
Right.
If you want to be honest. But no, if 24 hours later, a guy comes up to you and says like, hey man, like you were right, like I shouldn't have done that, regardless of what was said, like we're good, and it's like, yeah, no, we're good, then that's what, more than getting into the big leagues, that's where you talk about like leaving a legacy, is when, it's just little things like that. Because you, like you said, you're only going to play this game for so long, and so no, without a doubt, being a veteran guy, if there's a little ways like that, people will keep my name going. Like I said, that's all you can ask for.
I've been asking everybody this question because I think it's an interesting dynamic when it comes to the unwritten rules. There are those instances in a game, for example, a bat flip or swinging 3-0 when you're up quite a bit. But there's also those instances that occur semi off the field, whether it be a guy like Jim Bouton with his book Ball 4 that kind of exposes the clubhouse culture, or it be like what the Astros did in terms of their cheating scandal and how those impact those quote-unquote unwritten rules of baseball. For you, which one is a bigger infraction? Is it something that happens in the moment of a game, a bat flip, spikes high on a slide, or is it something that really hurts the integrity of the game, something like what the Astros did?
The integrity of the game, in a sense of, so when you start writing books and start exposing like stuff that majority of people would agree that shouldn't be exposed, then I can't. It's tough to jump on board with that. And then obviously, with the integrity of the game, when you talk about premeditated cheating, it's not so much cheating in the moment. Mm-hmm. So we're not talking about, obviously there's a huge difference when we talk about in the moment, the runner on second letting the hitter know a fastball inside's coming.
Right.
It's when you talk about premeditated, like obviously with the use of video and whatnot, it was so premeditated and so egregious in the thought process and the planning of it, and so it's I guess would probably be the best way to differentiate them would be the planning of the cheating and whatnot versus just the in the moment, fastball inside. And right. That's where just you talk about the integrity of the game. It's just the idea is just the crossing of the line is so egregious at that point would probably be the best way to describe it.
Had a chance last week to speak with a guy who you played for last year. In full disclosure, Tyler actually played on the High Point Rockers, so I've known him personally now for a couple of years, and spoke with your manager Jamie Keefe last week about these unwritten rules as well. And I'm kind of intrigued because so many people, it feels like when I talk about unwritten rules, it all comes back to the pitcher and like we're protecting their egos or something like that. You know how Jamie feels about pitchers.
I feel like we're getting into the 3-0 talk right now.
A little bit, yeah. But so I mean, where does that come from? Because again, when you're sitting there, and your job, especially in independent baseball, you're trying to get back to affiliated ball. You're trying to get back to the majors. Or a guy like Tatis Jr., who hits a grand slam on a 3-0 pitch up 7 in the 7th inning, he's trying to further his numbers to get paid to fulfill that stuff for his family.
Yeah.
And yet he's getting criticized because a pitcher couldn't make a better 3-0 pitch.
And when you talk about the big leagues, when we talk about the money involved in the big leagues, until they change the pay structure for rookies and whatnot, you can't put Tatis swinging 3-0 and what his potential earnings in that 3-0 swing and 4 RBIs and a grand slam do versus Mike Trout swinging 3-0. Mike Trout already has guaranteed money. Fernando Tatis is still on a league minimum. So the idea that just for monetarial, just the monetarial sake, the idea of ever really giving up, a single pitch until you have, a 10-year, $300 million deal in place is kind of crazy when you look back at it. Like, he's just trying to do better to essentially make more money, maybe not even next year or the following year, but in 3, 4, 5 years, and then for the rest of his life. So, but ultimately, here's the deal: is unless we talk about the unintentional intentional walk, and that's how you get 3-0. The pitcher's trying to pitch around the hitter, but if you're trying to do that, the unintentional intentional walk, what you're saying is, hey, we want to try and strike you out if you're willing to swing at balls, but we don't want to just put you on for free.
Right.
So with that being said, the idea of now, hey, and I there were a couple of dudes I had this conversation with the other day here. I said, do you know how hard it is to just get 2-0 in the big league, to just take 2 balls? Do you know? And I followed up, do you know how hard it is to just hit a lazy ground ball in the middle in the big league? Everybody is so good. It is so hard to get just a single hit in the big league. And I said, do you know how hard it is to get into a predictable count in the big leagues? Because every pitcher is either 95 to 100 and can throw a second, third, possibly a fourth pitch for a strike. So I said the idea of maybe 4 or 5 pitches throughout the course of a game being predictable, and he did the work to get to that point. It's hard to get 3-0 in the big leagues.
Yeah.
It's hard. Like, it doesn't happen a whole lot. So the idea that he put in the work to get into a predictable pitch count, whether it's 2-0, 3-0, 3-1, like that mindset is not going to change for him. And so, the people that get mad at him swinging 3-0 regardless of the score, they don't understand how hard it is to get a hit in general, let alone the big league. And then they just are they're oblivious to the monetary situation of a guy like Fernando Tatis versus like a Cano or Trout or some of these guys that are financially set already.
100%.
So on multiple levels, it's naive to essentially be angry at him swinging 3-0 right there.
100%, and it's a different way of looking at it that I don't think a lot of people are. They're looking at a potentially generational talent who's eventually going to make that kind of money, but that money's not guaranteed.
Yeah,
he's got to do whatever he can. So, but that's definitely an interesting way of looking at it. We're talking with Tyler Ladendorf, former major leaguer and current professional baseball player here on Caught Listening. Every week we like to give our fans an opportunity to ask some questions, and so we've got a couple here about these unwritten rules. This is one that I'm affectionately calling the Joe Kelly question because we've gotten it almost every single week to ask to everybody.
Okay.
Put yourself in that Dodgers dugout when he's going and he's buzzing the tower of guys like Bregman and Correa. What's your mentality if a teammate is doing something like that in those kind of situations?
Man, that's tough.
Obviously, you're going to stand up for your guy. You're going to back your guy, obviously. You're
going to be out there, obviously, when the bench is clear. But you're right. Joe Kelly is sticking up for the integrity of the game by doing it, but he's also putting a lot of people in awkward positions because it's different. And the one slider at Correa's head wasn't obviously intentional, but the 3-0 fastball up where he threw it on Bregman. Here's the deal: is because it's not so much about hitting someone in the head and killing him. It's about, even just shattering like an eye socket could like blind someone.
Right.
So like it's because of. But at the end of the day, like, they cheated to win a World Series. So the raw emotion in the moment, you can't even try and fathom where certain guys are at. It's unrealistic to try and think about. Well, they feel like they went to 7 games and they got cheated and they should have won. And it's like, you talk about legacies changing with or without a ring. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You know. I don't got to explain that to you. So you understand the raw emotion. But yeah, no, I mean, if I'm Joe Kelly's teammate, I'm running out there obviously and letting everybody know that I'm there, I'm behind them. But behind closed doors, it's probably a conversation where, hey man, because I know Alex Bregman doesn't have kids, but I do, and so if that's me, I'm like, hey man, like, just don't rob him of like being able the afterlife of baseball. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so I feel like ultimately that's where you draw the line. But that's, like I said, in the moment you're undoubtedly backing your guy, but behind closed doors it's maybe just a quick conversation. Just say maybe a little bit lower. Got no problem with the message you're trying to send there, but just maybe not where you went there. But no, I mean, you feel like you got cheated. It's you are undoubtedly in the right for feeling like you have a right to respond, but maybe not just the way he did. That was all.
100%. Last question here for you, and this is one that we got a couple weeks ago, and I'm really excited to finally ask this one. When is it appropriate to pimp a homer?
I'd say probably nowadays, once you hit 100, if you hit 100, you probably got at least 4 years in the big league, or you've already hit 30 in multiple years. But no, I feel like if you can hit 35 or 40 back-to-back years, you probably already earned the right to let people know when you get them. Or if you've been hit, or somebody in front of you has been hit, or if somebody's been intentionally walked in front of you, then you can let them know.
If there's a little bit of disrespect towards you before you even step in, it's okay to do it.
No. If like I said, if you've been hit, if you've hit enough, you've been hit, or you've been disrespected before you get in. I like the way you said that.
Tyler, we appreciate the time as always. I know you're finishing up the season here this week in the American Association. Happy that you were able, on a personal note, like I said, I've known you for a couple of years. Happy for you to be able to keep playing. Happy for you to be able to do it in your hometown outside of Chicago. And looking forward to hopefully seeing you back on the field again next year.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Looking forward to it. Appreciate you having me, big dog.
All right, it's Tyler Ladendorf, former big leaguer and current pro ball player in the Independent League American Association with the Chicago Dogs. And just real quick, because we've brought it up each of the last 3 weeks, but one note, and this is the last thing I'll say, at least on the Joe Kelly side of things, a lot of people have been saying he wasn't even on the Dodgers in 2017. No, he was not, but he was on the Red Sox team that the Astros also cheated on in the rounds prior to advance there. So he has every right to go out and do that. Maybe not at the head, as we've talked about last week with Jamie Keefe, this week with Tyler. You're potentially impacting someone's future outside of baseball, and that's the wrong way to certainly do it. Well, next week, we conclude our 4-part series of baseball's unwritten rules, and we finally bring in a guy who can defend all the people we have been, I don't want to say bashing over the last 3 weeks, but a pitcher, a former big league pitcher, former World Series champ and Cy Young winner too, is going to join us on the show next week to talk about the unwritten rules of baseball. If you have questions, find us on social media, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, Caught Listening by Public House Media, or email the show, caughtlisteningphm@gmail.com. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, review, share us with your friends and family. Until next week, I'm Christian Heimall. You have been Caught Listening.